Yo, what is up guys? Welcome back to a brand new F1 2021 tutorial. Today I'm gonna explain you guys how to learn to drive without ABS. Of course I've never really used ABS in the past 3 or 4 years on the F1 game. Maybe more actually. But yeah, basically what ABS does is it makes sure you don't lock your tires, and it's pretty powerful in the F1 game. I think driving with ABS is probably faster than driving without, if you use the right technique. Obviously I'm used to no ABS, so yeah, let's head into it. Basically I use always 100% brake pressure, but at the same time I've got a load cell brake, so it's I think a little bit easier for me to not lock up. As a load cell basically measures load on the brakes, and like standard pedals like a Logitech pedal or even the standard Fanatec SteelSeries Elite pedals have a potentiometer brake, which means it's a lot easier to go to 100%, but it is measured by distance and not by force, and basically your muscles recognize force easier than length, so that's why it is better to use a load cell brake. First of all, now onto the setup. Easiest one is the brake wise. If you go more forward, you tend to lock the front tires easier. If you go backwards, you tend to lock the rear tires more easy, of course. That's very easy and basic knowledge of racing. But then setup wise, there's a lot you can do as well. If you go lower front tire pressure, you get more mechanical grip on the front, and that makes it easier to not lock up as well once you start turning in. And the same kind of goes for the roll bar, as basically if you go softer front roll bar, it means more pressure on the inside wheel. So once you start turning in, you have this point where you're still braking, and that's where a lot of the times people lock up, also in real life. And basically if you've got a softer front roll bar, it keeps more pressure on the inside front tire. So for Monza turn 1, if I turn in, the inside tire will have more load, and thus it makes it harder to lock up. And the same goes for the springs. If you go softer front, more pressure on the inside front tire, and makes it easier to not lock up. And also if you go stiffer on both the rear roll bar and spring, it means also more pressure on the inside front tire. But of course it makes it more tricky with oversteer on mid to exit. Also if you go too aggressive, it might even happen on entry of a corner. So those are basics. Of course low down for Strax, it's a lot easier to lock up, so that's why we've gone to Monza, the perfect testing ground for this. So yeah, let's head into it, and now I'm gonna go more into the driving technique on how to not lock up without ABS. Alright, now into the final corner here, Parabolica. If you lock up, then you're doing something very wrong, because high speed corners you do not need to brake hard, you just have to keep a little bit of brake pressure. So if you lock up in a high speed corner, then you're doing really something wrong. You should not be braking that hard, that late. Into turn 1, basically what you want to do is brake 100% initially, and I will explain it in detail now, as trying to explain this while driving at the same time would be way too difficult. One of the most important things probably to not lock up is obviously the braking point. Driving at the racing line probably makes it a lot easier to know the braking point, but someone like me who has done a lot of hours on this game, I know every single braking point on every single track, at every single corner. Obviously when I move to the next game, it will change a little bit because the car behavior changes, but of course the F1 top speed of F1 cars will probably remain the same, more or less. So basically braking for turn 1 Monza is probably the furthest braking zone there is. And what I mean with that is basically braking for turn 1 Monza is probably the highest top speed you reach on the calendar, and maybe not even the highest top speed, but it's such a tight corner that you know, or I know myself, braking turn 1 Monza is around 110 meters, as you can see here, because I just started braking. So I know for other tracks that I don't or shouldn't brake earlier than that 110 meters. So I can always brake later at every single braking point. And that's just in my head, basically. Of course, with the load cell, the muscle memory that you create through the load cell brake makes it a lot easier to be consistent with brake curves and brake pressure. Now onto the second part of the braking, which is the initial hit of the brakes. And because F1 cars create so much downforce, initially it's almost impossible to lock up unless you got the wrong brake bias on, or there's something wrong with the car or setup. But in general, it's almost impossible to lock the brakes in dry conditions while going 330 kph. So initially, you always want to hit 100% or as hard as you can, as that's basically the most efficient way. That's how you slow down the most. And then you can hold at 100% for a little bit. As you can see right now in slow-mo, I hold it for quite a while before I start releasing the brakes, as you've got the downforce to keep the maximum brake pressure for quite long. And then once you can see here, this is the point where I start releasing the brakes, as if I would hold it 100% now, I would lock up. And then once I start turning in, that's where you start releasing more and more the brake pressure. You can see it's gradually going down together with the lessened downforce you get as you slow down, of course. And as you start turning in, you have to release the brake pressure more and more. And as you can see, once we're almost at the apex, we still have a little bit of brake pressure on. And the only reason we do that is to get the car rotated, because the center of mass moves forward as you're braking, of course. So there's more load on the front tires, which creates rotation. The more you trail brake, the more rotation you get. And that's why we're keeping that little bit of brake pressure on. If you keep too much brake pressure on, you will lock the inside front. Or if you have a lot of rotation in the car setup, you will spin. But you have to have the right amount of brake pressure. And basically carrying the brakes into the corner, like I am doing right here, that is the technique we call trail braking. So moving on a few meters later on the apex, we still have a little bit of pressure on. You can see on the throttle and brake trace, throttle of course is 0, but brake is still a few percentage on. And you might think it won't have any effect, but this is a massive effect on the balance of the car. Just carrying the little bit of brake a little bit longer in will rotate the car more. But of course, as I said, if you do it too much, then you will lock up. So that's not what you want. So trail braking is a very feeling kind of thing. You don't want to do it too much because you will lock up. And you don't want to do it too little because you want to create a rotation. And what a lot of people do that are using ABS, they're trail braking way too much, so they keep too much pressure on once they start turning in. And that's what creates the lockup on the inside front. So of course a load cell will help with that, but it's definitely not impossible as well, which is the potentiometer. If you start getting it right, I reckon you can be really fast with it as well. I just think load cell will be slightly more consistent, as the muscle memory helps you be consistent, of course. As you do laps, the muscle memory will get better. And now on to the second chicane. Basically we're going to be using the exact same technique as in the first chicane, but the only thing we're going to do is get off the brakes faster. As it's a faster corner, you can get off the brakes faster, so you don't have to throw brake as much. And then Lesmo 1 is a medium speed corner, as you might know. And as I said at the start of the video, on high speed corners you don't want to brake at 100%, as it won't work. It will either create a lot of oversteer, or if the brake bias is too much forward, you will lock the front, and you do not want that in a fast corner. So you absolutely do not need to brake 100%. As you can see here, in the bottom right, I'm on 60% brake pressure, and that's the maximum we're going to use here. And then we're going to bleed off the brakes. So slowly release it and keep a little bit on, as you can see. And the only reason we keep a little bit of pressure on is just to rotate the car. So once again, using the trail braking technique to rotate the car. And you can see that I went completely off and then went back on just to create more rotation in the car. And you know, Lesmo 1 is a medium speed corner. So in, for example, Parabolica or Ascari, or maybe even faster corners like Pouhon in Spa, you want to brake even less because you just create so much pitch in the car that it will oversteer, or you know, lock up in a very fast corner, which is absolutely not what you want to happen. So yeah, make sure to not use 100% brake pressure, or you can initially, but you have to come off the brakes really fast. So I might go 100% brake pressure into Parabolica maybe, but I will come off it really fast, as I do not want to lock up. You can see I went very briefly 100%, but I straight away went off it. On other games like iRacing, you will definitely not use 100% in a corner like that. Alright, I hope I explained well how to not lock up when you are not using ABS for the first time. You know, turn 1 is probably one of the heaviest braking zones on the wall calendar on Monza. So yeah, especially turn 1 was very much about how to not lock up, and then Lesmo 1 I explained a bit more how to balance the car with the brake. As for Parabolica as well at the start of the video. But yeah, Lesmo 1 was not really about how to not lock up, but more about balancing, and then turn 1 was really about how to not lock up without ABS. So I hope you guys learned something from it. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and see you guys next time. Ciao.